There are many skilled forgers in the world. Some people forge fake documents, some jewels, and some tried their hand at banknotes. But one great Scotsman did something no other con man has done before: fake a country. In this video, we'll be outlining the Poyes scheme and how one Scottishman fooled the rich aristocrats of Britain. And make sure to stay until the end of the video to see how this scammer paid for his crimes. Will of the Weasel. The criminal in the spotlight of this story is Gregor MacGregor, a Scottish man born in 1786 to a privileged family that was just on the cusp of being high-class aristocrats. Gregor joined the British Army when he was just 16 years old, as a way for him to learn the hardships of military service. But what happened was quite the opposite. Instead of intense training and discipline, Gregor received the equivalent of babysitting. This was achieved by winning the heart of the daughter of a Navy admiral. He was able to buy his way up the ranks of military service, but of course, ranks mean nothing when it's bought by money. Captain Gregor MacGregor was a coward, often leading his army into death. He was a spoiled brat, and his superiors knew it too. So eventually, when the Navy admiral's daughter died in 1811, he was kicked out of the army.
You're fired!
And his fortune was also cut off. Things were looking bleak for Gregor. With no career and no source of income, the only thing he had to lean on was his reputation. Being forced to resign from the army still didn't erase the fact that he was a captain that served in many battles during the Venezuelan Revolution. Using this reputation, Gregor went into riches once again. While things were starting to look great for Gregor, the truth will always be set free. In 1820, the brother of a soldier under MacGregor's leadership released a 418-page book dedicated to revealing how horrible of a captain MacGregor was. Now, you may be thinking, how could this big of a failure convince people to buy a country? Better yet, which rich idiots would even want to buy a country? The answer is, well, almost everyone. 1820s England was a different time, recovering from a war with pockets lined with insane amounts of money. This was after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, where Britain had saved up tons of money, but now had nothing to spend it on. With nothing better to invest in, and most European banks basically turning away the amount of buys, people were now looking for the next big investment. Luckily for them, South America was free for the picking. South America was a continent that was getting steadily back on its feet after being liberated from Spain, and these British colonizers were frothing at the mouth to get a piece. Since these countries were basically rebuilding from the ground up, they were selling away bonds that were worth $100 to $200 million in today's money, promising 6% annual return on investment. This was exactly what the British were looking for: high value and high yield financial investments. These bonds were only often produced in limited amounts, and the resale value for these bonds grew larger and larger as more people bought into the South American investment. Now, you would expect someone as slimy as Gregor MacGregor would find a way to manipulate the system, maybe even try to reproduce the bonds. But it turns out he had a totally different and much more harmful idea. Welcome to Poyes. During his time with the army stationed in South America, he'd gotten close with a man named George Frederick August I. George was yet another powerful man that Gregor had mooched off of and befriended for his own benefit. That benefit came in the form of 8 million acres of land in what is now known as Honduras. To put into perspective, 8 million acres is about as big as the state of Maryland. MacGregor, being a landowner in South America, decided that if other countries in South America were selling bonds, then he should too, and thus the country of Poyes was born. Poyes was a land of wonder and prosperity, or at least that's what Gregor claimed it to be. To help sell Poyes to potential investors, he walked around declaring himself as the Cacique of Poyes and acting like it was the real deal. He threw all his cash into marketing and crafting documents to make Poyes feel like a legitimate country. As his paid minions were ordered to boast about Poyes as a financial investment, he was also paying a ghostwriter to write an entire book about Poyes, saying that the country was due for rapid improvement. By 1822, the marketing paid off and people were clawing at the opportunity to buy their own share of land. The total number of bonds sold reached up to $25 million, and each of these bond owners were promised a 6% rate of return. So now the question was, how would MacGregor even pay these interest fees? For other countries, they would finance these interest rates by taking a piece of the profits made from agriculture and industries. Investments were, of course, meant to make money, but for MacGregor, he only wanted to line his wallets. Grand adventure. While other countries already had a bustling economy, Poyez had none. Poyez was bare bones, and it needed workers, settlers, and everything else a community needed to actually thrive. Thankfully for him, the hype for Poyez was big enough that many Europeans were thrilled at the chance at a new and prosperous life, throwing away their lives and exchanging all their money for Poyezian currency and land grants. And so the settlers came sailing in. The settlers included scientists, doctors, farmers, and the rich. As the settlers approached the land of Poyez, it felt like they finally found paradise. The sea was shimmering under the sunrise, and the land was outlined by sandy beaches and mahogany groves. The view from afar was immaculate, but they were mostly looking forward to the bustling city of St. Joseph, the capital of Poyez. St. Joseph was marketed as lively, with a pristine government center and a theater ready to entertain the masses. What they got was quite the opposite. In fact, they got nothing at all. There were no buildings, theaters, heck, there wasn't even a government center. What greeted them was the first batch of Poyez settlers in bamboo huts. There was no prepared housing for the settlers, and worse yet, there weren't even any banks to use the Poyezian money in. Escape from Poyez. We have good news and bad news. The good news was that there weren't any predatory animals in Poyez. The bad news was that all the predators all probably died because there was nothing for them to eat. The settlers of Poyez were all suffering from extreme heat, hunger, exhaustion, and of course, malaria. The settlers were on the verge of dying. Luckily for them, one of the settlers that got scammed was Hector Hall, a Belizean general. With his power and connections, Hector was able to save a few of the settlers, organizing rescue trips from afar and transferring 100 or so dying settlers to save their lives. As people got home with stories from Poyez, the truth was slowly being set free. The officials at Britain caught wind of this scam and started intercepting boats headed to Poyez. As some of the settlers came back to Britain, there were others that never came back at all. About a third of the settlers never made it back alive. So now one question remains: where was MacGregor during all this? While the settlers of Poyez died, MacGregor was out getting blackout drunk with other rich people. There was zero remorse for his victims, and he made no effort to hide it. But karma would catch up with him once again as the South American bond market crashed, right before the Poyez scam was revealed. The profits from agriculture that were supposed to go towards interest payments were used for their own military conflicts. These South American bonds soon became unpayable debts, and by connection, Poyez bonds were already crashing even before the truth came out. All this extravagant partying, including all the marketing he had funneled into faking Poyez's current state, meant that MacGregor had nothing left when his main source of income went belly up. His fraud was now known by the public, and it spread like wildfire. Knowing justice was coming for him, he fled to France in an attempt to dodge the accusations. Since the government was too busy dealing with its own imploding economy, it was now up to these victims to push for his capture. But instead, the victims couldn't care less. The victims recognized their sufferings as their own mistake for falling for Gregor's lies. And so, Gregor MacGregor was able to live the last years of his life as a free man, dying in Caracas, Venezuela in 1845, a quiet death for someone with innocent blood on their hands.